So I'm here today to share with you a book haul. This is going to include books that I received for review from publishers and authors, as well as books I bought myself. And also there were many generous subscribers and friends out there who sent me books for my birthday at the end of July, so I'm going to be sharing those with you as well. All that said, before we get started, I do have timestamps down below because I know not everyone wants to hear about all the different categories, so you feel free to skip around to whichever books sound interesting. All that being said, let's get started. First, let's start with gifts. The first one I received is The Magician's Land by Lev Grossman. This is the one that came from Stephanie. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. This is the third and final book in the Magician's trilogy, and I own the first two books, and I mentioned it on my summer TBR, so I'm going to be reading this very soon, but I needed the third book, so this is perfect. Now I can binge through all three books and come back with a review. If you don't know, this is a story that follows a young man who finds out that magic is real and goes off to a magic school, so it's kind of a spin on a Harry Potter and also a mashup with a Narnia type story, and I've always wanted to go and complete this trilogy. Really excited to be able to do that now, and this is just a really thoughtful gift. This one actually came in June, so before my birthday, and I just really appreciate someone thinking of me this way. Next is The Delicate Dependency by Michael Talbot. This is a book that I received from a subscriber, Sarah. Thank you so much for this. This is a vampire story that I actually love. I always say I don't like vampire stories on my channel, but I actually did a whole video talking about that recently. That did pretty well. I think a lot of you enjoy vampire books that don't suck, and this is one that could be on the list, but I didn't think of it when I was recording it. But this is a vampire story following a doctor who saves this man who possibly is not human, and the story goes from there. And it actually hits on a lot of the tropes of the genre, but it does so in a way that I just loved. I remember lapping it up, and I've been dying to reread it. And something like this, I feel like it's a little bit hard to find. You know, I'm never going to find it in a used bookstore. I have to buy it new. And yeah, I'm really excited to get back to it and do a reread, hopefully this fall. Next, from my dear friend Mike, I received a copy of The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. And of course, if you follow my channel, you'll know that I recently read all the books that are published in this series and really loved it. So I was really delighted to have an excuse to get the first book in this series, and it's definitely one again that I'm going to reread, that I'm going to revisit, and I thought that was a really great and thoughtful gift, so thank you, Mike. And from another friend and subscriber who I'm going to call Chris, he sent me a copy of Red Seas Under Red Skies, the second book in the same series, and so this is perfect. They're the same edition, they're beautiful. Now I just need to get the third book, which is the last book that's out published, but this is definitely one of my favorites in the series because it has a pirate angle to it, and I love pirate books. You could send me pirate books all day long. I will read them. I definitely want to do a pirate recommendation video, but I'd like to read a few more before that happens. But yeah, just delighted to have this one because it's absolutely one I need to reread. It's so funny, it's so piratey, and I love it. I know piratey isn't really a word, but I'm sorry. And also from Chris, he sent me a copy of Liminal Zone by Junji Ito. If you don't know, I have been collecting Junji Ito books for years now. I always consider myself not to be that much of a book collector, but when it comes to Junji Ito, I love having all of his books. I'm probably due to do an updated bookshelf tour, and of all the parts of my bookshelves to show off, I particularly love my Junji Ito books because I think he's a creative mind. His artwork is beautiful, so I love having physical copies, and the books themselves are gorgeous. They're well made and just weird and gorgeous and all those kind of things, so really excited to add this one to the collection. Thank you so much again. And I also want to mention the audiobooks that I've received over the last few months, because even though I don't have something physically to show you, they are still fantastic gifts, and I really do appreciate them because I do read a lot of books on audio, or especially love to reread on audio. So my good friend Whitney from The Sauce of Storycraft sent me a Audible credit as a gift, and so she actually was really smart in how she did this. So she decided to send me the credit and not the actual book, because by doing so I not only got a book credit, but it also allowed me to have 30 days of the Audible catalog. And so this was a really thoughtful Mother's Day gift that she sent. I think I was having kind of a low day, and so with that credit I ended up getting the audio for Lies of Locke Lamora, which I know kind of breaks my rule. I always say I don't want to own a book and have the Audible version as well, but this is a case where I love both versions. I want to read it and listen to it at the same time, so I'm bending my rule because I have no regrets. I definitely wanted a physical copy and the audio, so I used my credit there, but then I also used that month of Audible to access their catalog, and then I read through all of The Count of Monte Cristo, which was amazing. I'm not sure if I'm going to do an actual review on it for my channel since it's kind of outside my normal wheelhouse, but it is really long, but it's really worth it. I can see why people love it so much. I'm not a classic reader, but that is an excellent revenge story. So thank you for allowing me to get the bonus gift of going through the book catalog for a month. That was really fun. And I also received an audiobook for my birthday from a subscriber. I'm going to call him Bill or William. And that was The Library at Mount Char. And this is a book that I've been hearing amazing things about, but I never can really get anyone to put their finger on whether it's horror, it's thriller, it's fantasy. It apparently genre bends and it's really weird and no one can describe it. And so that's the kind of book I just have to check out for myself. So I was more than delighted that they sent a copy of it to check out. I've heard that the audio performance is really great, and you're probably going to see that book on my fall TBR, because when I do get a book as a gift or a book for review, I do try to read it right away, but I feel like that book will be perfect for the fall season. So I've been patiently waiting and holding off reading it, but I don't have to wait too much longer. I cannot wait. Thank you again, Bill. Next, I want to talk about a special package of books that I received, which I don't think were necessarily for my birthday, but happened to come around the same time. So I have a very thoughtful subscriber who has been messaging for me for a while. They tend to comment on a fair number of my videos, so I do tend to recognize if you are commenting regularly. I kind of recognize your handle and all of that. And so this one person ended up commenting, reaching out to me and sending me an email, and they want to send me a box of books that they had curated over, I think, a good portion of time, at least 6 months, without sharing too much of their story, because I don't think it's mine to tell. But they were going through some difficult times over the last few years. I think a lot of us were going through difficult times around 2020, but they had even more going on. So huge respects. And somehow my little silly videos helped them to give them some distraction from some of the terrible things that were going on, the really challenges that they were dealing with. And my videos, along with some others, helped them to get through that. So I was more than honored that they not only wanted to say thank you, but actually to send me something, which is never ever necessary. Feel free just to drop me an email if you do have some personal to say and don't want to leave it in a comment section below. But it was really thoughtful. So they got my PO box and sent me this box of books. I'm going to try to do justice to this, because I will say I'm a black-hearted reader and a black-hearted person in the way that I don't always get very emotional about these kind of things. But I was near tears opening this because it was one of the most thoughtfully curated book collections I've ever seen. And I have not read any of the books in this box. They had carefully checked that it was things that I hadn't read yet. And the books that they selected for me were mostly off my radar, and they were just right up my alley. I haven't read them yet. I purposely held off reading them just so that I could film this before I get into them, but I will definitely be coming back with reviews as I get through them. Now, before I get into the actual books in this package, let me quickly show you what was on top of the stack of books, and that is this oversized business card of Patrick Bateman. You all know I love American Psycho, and it's actually funny because I don't think I shared this on camera, but my husband was at work and one of his coworkers showed him the scene in American Psycho, the movie, where they are showing their business cards. And he loved that scene so much, he came home and said, we need to watch American Psycho. I'd already seen it, so it was a rewatch for me. But when he saw this card, I was excited for this card, but he is just as excited for this card as I am. We have to figure out what we want to do, if we want to put it on the fridge or something. But this card is absolutely perfect. It's so thoughtful. And it's like embossed and everything. Like, I don't know, it's quality. I think it's absolutely perfect. So that was just a hilarious surprise and just, again, so crazy thoughtful. The first book in this package is Scanlines by Todd Kessling, which looks like a novella-length book. And this one is set in, I believe, the 1980s, where there was this congressman who committed suicide on television. And this was videotaped, and there's an urban legend going around now that if you watch this tape, it will cause you to commit suicide. So definitely this is a play on something like The Ring, but I happen to love that movie. And I just think that that sounds amazing. I love when books, especially horror, involves older technology, so like VHS tapes and all of that. And just technology in general when it comes to horror works really well for me. This sounds right up my alley, and again, a book that I have never read, so I'm gonna have to change that. Next is one that was on my Goodreads TBR, but I did not own a copy, and that is Eileen by Otessa. I never know how to say her last name. I've read one book by her, which was absolutely messed up last year, and I've always meant to go back to this one. I know very little about this book other than the fact that the main character is Eileen, and she is supposed to be super unlikable, like everyone hates her, but obviously it's done that way on purpose, and I tend to like books when a character is purposely unlikable. And I know this is a book that I've seen online, so this is one of the few in the package that I did recognize, because I've had several booktube friends read this book and absolutely love it. It's one of their all-time favorites, but for some reason I never got to it myself, but I really think I'm gonna love it based off of how my tastes align with theirs. And again, I'm hoping it's really messed up, because the last book I read by her was so weird, and I want more. Next is one I've never heard of before, and that is Suicide Town by Boris Basic. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. And this is a story that follows this man named Dean, who's a writer who's struggling with his next work. He goes off to this small town trying to kind of get his creativity back. And of course he goes to this town, and little does he know there's a secret there that the townspeople have. And the tagline is kind of, you can visit this town, but you won't be leaving. And so it sounds like small town horror, secrets, folk horror, all these kind of things that I love. So I kind of assume I know where this book is going, but I'm very happy to go along for the ride. I don't necessarily need to be surprised by a book if it does it well. And yeah, I'm just really curious. And I also love the blue on this cover. So yeah, I just, again, love getting books that I've never heard of, that are completely off my radar. And yeah, hopefully I love it as much as I think I will. And next up is The Visible Filth by Nathan Bellegarde. And this, I believe, is the same author who wrote The Strange, which is a novel I love this year. So I hope I'm not wrong about that. But this is very short, so I actually wonder if it would be short story length. I'm not sure if this counts as a novella, but I just know that it follows a man who discovers a cell phone after a violent brawl, and then his life descends into a nightmare. And again, I love horror that involves technology, and I'm hoping that this will be way better than Cell by Stephen King. I shouldn't say that I got so many downvotes when I talked about the book last time. But yeah, I'm really excited. I hope this is the same author I'm thinking of, because I don't know, it sounds interesting. It's short. I know nothing about it. And yeah, I'll give it a try. Another book I haven't heard of is Brother to Dragons, Companions to Owls by Jane Lutskold. And this is a story that, again, it's just reading it back, it's one that I'm not quite sure what it's going to be about, which is so helpful when you're watching a book haul. Don't you just love when the booktuber is not prepared? But basically we follow this person named Sarah, who is living in an asylum where she was raised, but then she gets kicked out, and she's just trying to get out and live her life. I don't know, it sounds super weird. It's one I fully admit I will have to come back once I've read it and give you a proper review, because I don't really know what it's about, but the cover is really stunning. And again, based off of how thoughtful all these other books in the package have been, I have no doubt that this one definitely is going to hit some of my buzzwords, because I don't know, they seem to know my taste very well. And the last book in the package might be the one I'm most excited for, and that is Rust and Stardust by T. Greenwood. Another book that I've never heard of before, but sounds right up my alley. So this is a story that is fictionalized, but is based off of the real life case that inspired Lolita. And if you don't know, I was obsessed with Lolita last year. I read Lolita, I read My Dark Vanessa, and several other books that deal with those same ugly topics. And so I'll be honest, I kind of wanted more. I was fascinated by the conversations around it, but it's really hard to Google and find books like Lolita because you go to some really strange place of the internet. And so I somehow never came across this book. I had not heard of it before, but the fact that it's based not only on the real life case, but it just, I don't know, it sounds right up my alley. So I'm dying to get into this one. I'm hoping it's going to give me similar vibes to My Dark Vanessa or anything like that, because I like my books messed up. I love when they deal with really dark and uncomfortable topics, and it really doesn't get any more dark and uncomfortable than this. So yeah. Anyway, that is everything in that package there. I am again overwhelmed. Again, not specifically even the quantity of books or anything like that, but just the thoughtfulness that came into picking out books that were so clearly selected for me. You don't know how often I get emails from publishers and indie presses and authors who say, oh, I watch your channel all the time. Here's this YA romance that I know you're gonna love. And it's very clear that they have never watched my channel. And so getting a collection of books that are so clearly, truly curated for my very niche personal taste was incredible. Thank you so much, Sabrina. I am just overwhelmed by your generosity, and I'm just, you know, touched that my videos in some way could have helped you at a tough time, and I'm glad to hear that life is looking up. Take care. Next, let's talk about books that I bought myself, which in my mind is always one of the most interesting parts of book hauls on YouTube, because I like to know where people spend their own money, because it's very different than books that I openly accept for review, because if it doesn't cost me anything, I don't have as much at stake. But if I have a limited budget, I have to be very mindful how I spend my money. That being said, the first thing I have to show you is some books I bought at Book Outlet. And that is a very dangerous discount site that I'm going to have linked down below if you want to go down that rabbit hole. They do have really good book prices and all of that, but you definitely have to be aware of what you're looking for or set some budgets for yourself. I kind of went overboard. I only have a few books to show you here, but down the road I'll show you a little bit more of what I got, so stay tuned for that. So I previously showed you that years ago I got a copy of Dune. This was a gift from a subscriber. Read the first book, and then I showed you before that I got the next book of Dune from a previous haul. So this is again a repeat. But what I showed you is that I got, this is the Mass Market and this is the trade paperback. So when I was doing a book outlet sale, I needed to go and get one more book in my cart in order to get free shipping. So what did I do? I decided to get the third book. So this is Dune Messiah. So I decided to get Children of Time, but they didn't have the same editions. So people are crying, I'm sure, as they watch this. So I now have the Mass Market paperback of the first book, the trade pack, which at least is the same version, and then a totally different version of a different trade back. So I actually really like this cover. I don't know which ones I'm going to collect. I kind of have a problem. But again, I don't actually consider myself a big book collector. The biggest reason that I buy books is so I can access them, so I can read them and loan them out to friends and get to like annotate them, things like that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking, but I kind of love it. Then at a garage sale here in town for $1, I got a copy of The Ghost Bride. And this is a historical horror book that is set in Malaysia that I recently talked about. It was one of my early favorites of the year and might make my end of the year list the way it is going. And this one follows a woman who is betrothed to a man who is already dead. This is considered to be very unlucky, but her father pushes for that agreement because they need the money. And she ends up communicating with the dead. It's just, I don't, it's so unique, it's so original. I tend to not like ghost stories, so when I find one that really works for me, I get pretty excited. So this is one, again, I've already read, but I really want to reread, which again is why I like to have a copy. You can tell I'm a big rereader if you can't tell from these hauls. Speaking of rereads, I also had a fantastic sale in my town where there was a whole bunch of books for cheap. And so I got a copy of Leviathan by Scott Westerfeld. I was actually reading this book from the library at the time that I went to the sale. Loved the book so much. I was really excited to find a copy for, I believe, $1. Might have been $2, which is still a good deal, at least here in Canada. And what I love with the physical book, this is a piece of YA alternative science fiction. So we follow past of how World War I started. But in this version of the war, there are those that use biopunk technology and those that use steampunk. And so it's kind of reimagined. And what I really like with the physical copy is that there are these beautiful illustrations all throughout the book. So you really get to actually see that on the pages. And I just had a really good time with this book. I'll be honest, it's a lot lighter than the books I normally read because again, it's meant for a young adult audience. But is it escapist, good fun? I really enjoy steampunk and this one is great. So if you have other steampunk recommendations, let me know. And at that same sale where I picked up Leviathan, I also got a copy of The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. This is one I have not yet read. I believe it is a vampire story, which isn't always my thing. I believe it's also historical, which isn't my thing. But for some reason, I think I'm gonna love it. Now, normally when I buy a book, I do have a goal for myself to read it right away because I like to keep my TBR very close to 0, which is very close right now. I think I have about 5 books on there as we speak. But this is one that while I really want to read it, I am gonna hold off until maybe the winter, just because I think it's a piece of gothic fiction and I just don't crave that kind of story during the hot summer months. So when it gets cold outside, this is gonna show up on my winter TBR. So I'll let you know about that ahead of time. Now let's talk about horror books that I received for review. The first one, or the first two rather, is the duology of Frankie Graves. So we have the first book, part 1, and then the second one, part 2. These books look great together. And of course, I've gushed about it before, this author does his own illustrations, which in another author's hand would be a nightmare. But I love these retro illustrations. I think the author is crazy talented, both as a writer and as an artist. And I think it just works so well together. As other people have mentioned on my channel, that like when I'm holding these books, it looks like I'm holding up old vintage copies of slasher books, and that's intentional here. And so these, of course, I talked about recently, but these are books that are, well, at least the first one is set in the 1950s, but takes on the style of a 1980s slasher. They are so much fun, they are easy to read, and if that's up your alley, I do hope you check them out. I'm a huge fan of this author's work, and I can't recommend them enough. Speaking of authors I adore, I also got a copy of Suckerville by Chris Sorensen, and this is a book that I actually have chosen not to review on my channel simply because I realized when I got into it that it's really not to my personal taste. And that is just the fact that my tastes when it comes to horror are changing. But this is the same author who wrote The Nightmare Room and the trilogy of The Messy Man, which I adore. That is the book, or at least the first book, that really made me fall in love with the framework of what a haunted house story could be. I never understood the appeal of the genre until I read the Messy Man trilogy. And so here we follow a completely different story. It's totally unrelated. So we follow this man who has had a bad run of luck, and then he ends up going out with his buddy to this bar, and then they have to stop these suckers that are attacking the whole town. So it's just the kind of ridiculous B-movie plot that you would expect for something like this. I started reading it, and I'll be totally honest, I just didn't really feel that I could do much in terms of a review for this because it's just so not my thing in terms of the kind of books I enjoy reading. I don't really watch movies like this, but I totally appreciate there's definitely an audience for this. As I'm talking about this, I know there are those out you that are like, oh man, that sounds amazing. I do think it's well done for what it's doing. It's just not my personal taste. Had it not been this particular author who I previously adore and still want to see everything else they do, but this style of horror is just something that I've come to kind of start avoiding. But is there an audience who will love this? Absolutely. This is a really fun premise, just not for me. Next, I want to mention Mother Howl by Craig Clevenger. This is a book that I received for review from Datura, and this is a new crime publisher that I'm really watching what they're putting out. This one follows a young man who has a past that's something that is haunting him from there, and he has to deal with it as an adult. It's a book that's heavily character focused, which sometimes works for me, sometimes doesn't. I'll be honest, this one doesn't work for me as well as I hoped it would, but I'm still very excited about what this publisher is putting out, and I'm hoping that the next book will work much better for me. Next up, we have an arc of Red Rabbit by Alex Gratian, and this is a book that is coming out this fall, so you'll hear me talk about this more soon. But this, I believe, is a piece of folk horror where we follow a ragtag group that is trying to track down and hunt a witch. It just sounds super fun, super fall and witchy and all of that, so I'm hoping I'm gonna love it. And it's a new Tor Nightfire title, and I'm hoping that this one will be right up my alley. We shall see. And I also received a copy of The Dead Take the A Train by Cassandra Khaw, as well as Richard Kandery. And this is a book that I picked up largely because of the author Cassandra Khaw. I've read a couple of her novellas and really have been enjoying them. And so I'm eager to see her write a full-length novel. And I actually have not read anything else by the other author, but I know they're very popular. I do have their books on my TBR as backlist works, but I just haven't gotten to them yet. I believe this is cosmic horror, and I honestly don't know too much about it. I know that it involves magic and monsters, and it's kind of one I'm just going to go into a little bit blind because it's kind of the book that I just want to experience without having too many preconceived ideas, but the author alone makes me really want to check out this one. Next, let's talk about fantasy review copies. I got a copy of Be Sure by Shauna McGuire, which is the bind-up of the first 3 books in the Wayward Children series, and I've already read and reviewed them all. And of course, this is portal fantasy. The idea is that children go away to other worlds, and this book is so smart with this bind-up really because it focuses on what happens when the kids come back. It is just so thoughtful. I love the way that it weaves in the social commentary of kind of addressing how parents struggle when their children become people that they don't understand and how they blame outside sources. It's reading it as an adult, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack on here. It's very smart, and I really did love it a lot. And again, I believe all the individual books are done as hardcovers, so this might be a more affordable way to at least get the first 3 books in the series. I'm not sure if there's plans to do bind-ups of the later books or not, but that would be nice. Next, we have The Judas Blossom by Stephen Aaron, which is a piece of epic fantasy inspired by Mongolian culture. This book I received from Angry Robot Books, and it's taking the internet by storm. It is so beloved, and I can definitely see why. But really what I wanted from the story was more. This book is, I believe, 400 pages, so it's not actually that short, but this book could have easily been 600 or 800 pages for my preference. I could just spend a lot of time in the world of ancient Mongolia. This is set after Genghis Khan, following different perspectives. And yeah, I was really excited about it. I really did like it, but again, I could have spent twice as much time in this book. It felt very fast, and I just wanted to soak in every detail and really have the author spend their time and kind of take their time going through this all. So I'm again excited to see what book 2 is going to bring. And yeah, now I have to impatiently wait because it's probably about a year till the next one comes out, I assume. Next up is A Stranger in the Citadel by Tobis Buckle. And this is a book that I received from Tachyon Publishing. And this is either a short novel or a novella, depending on the length, maybe a novel. And all I know about this one is basically the tagline is, "You shall not suffer a librarian to live." And so it's all about a world where you have someone who is an outcast librarian, and they show up to get help. They're going to be executed, and of course the story spirals from there. I just think the premise sounds so interesting. I'm always looking for unique books, and I just really think I'm going to love this one. So I hope that's the case. You'll see my review once it comes out, which is in October. And last for fantasy, let's talk about City of Bones by Martha Wells, which I believe is a republishing of a book she wrote many years ago. Since the phenomenon of Murderbot, I think there's a lot of interest in their backlist, and so they're kind of bringing it back to make it more easily accessible. I haven't read a ton of this author's fantasy, so I'm hoping that this one really works for me. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to this one. Stay tuned. And let's talk science fiction. I gotta admit, it's way harder to find science fiction review copies. I find I just have a lot better luck when it comes to requesting fantasy books. I think there's just more out there, so not necessarily that I'm getting more, but just there's a better percentage of the chance that I'll get accepted on something that's fantasy. And so the first one I requested is The Djinn-Bot of Shantiport. This is by Sumit Basu, who's the same author who wrote the novella I loved last year, The City Inside. This is a full-length novel, and it follows a girl who is living in Shantiport, which is a gateway to the stars. Her brother is a small monkey bot, and somehow there's a tech billionaire who coerces this girl to do something, and things go from there. It's, again, a kind of a book where I just expect the world building to be amazing based off how much I loved their novella. And it just sounds, again, weird and unique and different. And that's really all I want to know. I don't love to know too much in terms of the premise when I go into a story. So again, this one is coming out in the fall, and I will report back once I've read it. The other sci-fi book I have is a September release, and that is Exodelic by John Evans. And this is a book that is about an offshoot of the US military that trains artificial intelligence in the dark arts that humanity calls black magic. It just sounds really unique and strange, and it's, again, a book that just sounds really different, which is always what I'm looking for. Obviously, it's going to be a mashup between science fiction and fantasy, but I will report back because I don't know how this is going to go, but I really hope I'm going to love it because I love stories about artificial intelligence, and this one, again, sounds really bizarre, which is really entertaining to me. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And tell me down below, what is a book that you recently purchased or received as a gift? Again, thank you so much to everyone who sent me gifts for my birthday. I got absolutely spoiled. I really appreciate it. Never expected, but honestly, it really did make my day. So thank you so much for that. If you're new to my channel, I do read a lot of horror, thriller, science fiction, fantasy. So if you want to stick around and subscribe, I appreciate that. If you want to give me help with this video, you can give me a thumbs up. You can drop it a comment, even if it's just a little emoji like a pumpkin or a stack of books. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.